Hello and welcome to the next episode of Fiddler's Green podcast number 71, Shroves and Stylings. It took me a while to come up with that title. To be quite honest, I had a very difficult time actually thinking of anything that was worth talking about. Obviously, this is Shrove Tuesday, aka Mardi Gras for people who are of a more secular persuasion. And there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of small stories, but it's much harder to come up with a large unifying theme. And you can see people commenting on the chat here. I swapped out the picture frames because there was a glare, and instead I now have a map of my home state, California. There, I was teaching my son about geography. And I thought it was a good thing to put there that was not going to have some kind of reflective surface like the other pictures did. So hopefully everyone their eyes are going to be spared the problem of catching glare. And I'm coming at you in good volume. I don't see anyone putting F's in the chat. I guess I hear YouTube might be down. So this is going to be a problem for me if I'm resetting it right now. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's not still down. But either way, I wanted to broadcast tonight because, what better night is there to have a podcast than Shrove Tuesday, even if there isn't very much to talk about, even if there isn't very much to go over in the news. it feels kind of auspicious to kick off Lent with ruminations about various things and various topics. And, I have a few things to talk about. I have a few things that I want to kind of cover. Hopefully, people in the chat, there is an entropy link there. You can also at me in the chat, give me something to talk about in terms of questions. I'd love to answer them, but I can go over things that have been on my mind, and I think form something of a coherent talk. For the last week, I've been seeing this new Zoomer neologism, the generational run. Now, I don't know. You definitely know that you're old when the neologisms that are put into online speech. I mean, obviously, I've since I've been on YouTube, since I've been blogging, I've never been young. I started doing this in my early 30s, and so I've never been I've never been in with the hip crowd. But back in 2015, 2016, the internet slang still represented a kind of culture of the internet that I was more or less comfortable with. I knew how this worked. I knew how it was supposed to feel. Think about the most recent one was slop, or the one before that, based and cringe. Woke is one that hit mainstream a little bit too quickly and kind of got overused. All of these pieces of slang were kind of easy to discern. They represented actual internet subcultures that I was familiar with. They, like Weeboo is another one. Weeboo, Leet was one from the 90s. Like, that's really old. That along with Otaku, no one uses anymore. No one even cares about whether you're good with technology anymore. Back in the 90s, being a nerd that was good with technology and computers was, oh my God, he's really good at computers. No one cares about that anymore. I mean, they certainly won't care about that after the era of generative AI. But either way, all of these things, they felt kind of the language itself. What makes a good piece of slang, in my opinion, is that the thing that you're saying, the words that you're using, kind of invoke the thing that it actually is. Now, obviously, this isn't exactly the case with things like awesome and radical, to take slang that comes from the 70s and 80s. These were tubular. Remember that one? Tubular was an 80s slang. They all meant the same types of things. And these were obviously terribly misused words in terms of slang because they conveyed something that was not really in keeping with the original meaning of the word. Awesome was supposed to, everyone always says this, awesome and awful kind of meant the same thing, full of awe. And if the awe was good, it was awesome. And if the awe that you were feeling of this magnificent thing this large thing you were witnessing, if the awe you were feeling was bad, it was awful. And so awesome became degraded in the 70s, and it kind of just became the equivalent of swell. That was an awesome dinner. That was a swell dinner. It's just really good. Or radical, again. Radical is supposed to mean extreme, unusual, absolutely out of the ordinary. And it just became another kind of superlative exclamation people used for really good. You could use it interchangeably with awesome, but still, even with those degraded words, and even with words that didn't mean anything, like lead or otaku or weeboo or based or soy, these things, they felt like you could kind of understand the polarity of them, the polarity of these words. And the same thing is true for anything, right? Square has a bad polarity. If someone's square, they're bad, they're uncool. If someone is radical, they are cool. If someone is based, then they are cool. If someone is cringe, then they're not. And the same thing is true for soy, right? One of the most fundamental things about slang words typically is that they have a very discernible polarity. The people using them indicate in-group or out-group when they're using them. And what I've noticed about Zoomer, and this is a very big cutoff, there aren't that many differences between Zoomers and younger millennials. Like I said before, there's actually more difference between older millennials like myself and younger millennials than there is between younger millennials and Zoomers. Because the cutoff between older millennials and younger millennials was simply the question: did you grow up with social media and iPhones? Did you properly grow up in the Web 2.0 era? Or are your first internet memories from the pre-internet era, or the pre-internet proper era, or the internet 1.0 era? That is the cutoff for being a younger millennial or a Zoomer. And it's a much more relevant cutoff than the cutoff between Zoomers and younger millennials, which is more or less just, it's an arbitrary age difference. I don't know really what. And maybe if you were born after 9/11, you're a Zoomer. I guess that's it. I'm guessing. I don't know. That's my personal cutoff. If you have no memory of 9/11 whatsoever, maybe that's the cutoff for a Zoomer. But no one really cares about that. Who cares if you have no memory of it? You didn't have memory of it either if it happened when you were 4. So these things are very arbitrary, but there are some differences that are interesting to see, and you can see this in some of the Zoomer slang. The slang that really started growing up in the last few years, really after COVID. Like the word for good was bussin'. Bussin' is a terrible slang. It's a terrible piece of slang. It conjures up, just a very effeminate praise word. It's kind of androgynous. What's bussin'? I guess the broccoli haircut is just sort of an indication. Like the broccoli haircut is bussin'. The male perm cut with the sides. It's neither radical nor it is neither extreme nor pedestrian. It is neither a male nor female. It's just like this ambiguous piece of culture that doesn't really declare itself. Also, in Zoomer culture, at least as it exists now, I'm sure it'll get better. Zoomers tend to be much more, in contrast to younger millennials, right? They're very much more like Gen X and less like millennials and boomers, in the sense that they seem to have a much looser understanding of morals and political sides. Now, in all likelihood, this is more or less a product of the fact that they're still young. They're still in their 20s. Everyone's kind of a nihilist in their 20s. But unlike a lot of the younger millennials that got into politics right away in 2016, or kind of picked a side really quickly, or had a heavy reaction to it, Zoomers are kind of detached, and they're much more obsessed with status. Which is why this Zoomer turn of phrase, generational run. I've been seeing this phrase everywhere, and it bothers the hell out of me. It bothers the hell out of me. The first time I saw it was in the context of, again, like, unlike any good slang word of past times, the problem with generational run is it doesn't immediately conjure an image of what it is just through the language itself. Also doesn't have a clear polarity. Could someone, it has a polarity in the sense that a generational run, I think of speed run. When I think generational run, I think, okay, you are doing like a real life speed run for your generation, meaning it's like a once in a generation thing. This is a really big thing you're doing. And it's kind of like a speed run, and you're just all in on this. And but what's missing? What's missing is like, is the generational run good? Is it bad? Like, are serial killers having generational runs? Did the Manson family have a generational run? Did Mozart have a generational run? And it doesn't even seem like it really matters. The only thing that matters is like the generational run is big, it's happening now, and it's going on for a limited time. And the first person who had a generational run that was described this way in the last 2 months was obviously Nick Fuentes, which I kind of appreciate. He had his moment in 2025 where his presence, not anything he really did, just the man himself, he just walked on, did nothing, and the immune reaction that his presence inspired. I mean, I'm not going to say he's not talented; he's a very good speaker, but just the over the top immune auto response that he inspired in both the mainstream media and the conservative media created almost, I'm not really a realignment, but just a complete shattering of what was politically possible and impossible in any given moment. That was the first generational run. Was it a run? Not in the way that I usually think of speed runs. I mean, it was Nick had been laying the groundwork for them. I mean, he's been around as long as I have. He's been around again 10 years. He started his channel the same year I did, the same year ContraPoints did, in the very auspicious year of 2015 to 2016. And then he had a moment, and it was the generational run. Okay, I guess. I don't usually think of speed runs taking 10 years. And the main thing about speed runs is like they're really intense and then they're over. And when they're over, they're just they're frozen in aspect. They are what they are. Maybe they're an untouchable record. Maybe they'll be shattered the next day. But the thing is dead. It doesn't persist after the run. It just the run happens and then it's over, and then that's it. That's all, and the show's over. And so generational run kind of indicates that you're having this explosion and it's going to end. Which obviously, if that is the case with Nick Fuentes, that's exactly the opposite. What the last thing I want Nick Fuentes to be. And again, I'm not really a Nick Fuentes fan at all, as I've said many, many times. But if there's any good thing that he can inspire, it is a realignment of the political consciousness of the West to be something that is more in line with reality, more in line with politics as it has been done historically. That is the effect that we want to see from Nick Fuentes. And there's 1,000 other people that could kind of substitute in for his worldview. Again, all he is somebody who is a right winger in a classic sense. He's talented speaker, and he's made himself the symbol of the post-conservative right. But there's 1,000 other people that could be in his place. But for that moment with Piers Morgan and with Tucker Carlson to have relevance, then it would have to be ongoing. It couldn't just be like somebody's individual run. Then of course, the next time I saw generational run was naturally with Clavicular, this absolutely idiotic looks maxer. 22-year-old guy. This comes from this weird incel community where men convince themselves, not without some justification, that all women care about in the modern world, or all Zoomer women care about in the modern world, is looks and status. So what do? Well, you destroy your entire life so that you can optimize this one metric of looks, to the point where Clavicular is taking multiple regimens of hormone replacement therapy for his own sex. He's smashing his face with a hammer. He's getting plastic surgery. He's redesigning his entire life around ascending into this looks maxed god. And he's known for absolutely nothing else than being incredibly superficial and having these interactions that are kind of, I don't know, they're comedy numbers at his own expense. There's no way that anybody, if you are, I don't really even think, I don't even think that he's like this Adonis. He's not an Adonis. Again, someone said he sterilized himself to look more masculine with hormone replacement therapy. It's questionable whether he can even perform the physical act of coitus. He's so medicated. He's smashed his own bone structure. He's probably destroyed his own health, and he looks okay. He looks Instagram good. He looks Instagram good. And he's mainly known for, again, these interactions with the press that feel like comedy routines. But if anyone else did them that was not looks maxed, they would be the butt of the joke. No one, say what you will about Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes modeled in his interactions with Piers Morgan and in his interactions with Tucker Carlson what Nick Fuentes was doing, and what I think this is sort of what people like him for. You could argue that he's a once in a generation talent in terms of rhetoric as well, and certainly, again, he's a great speaker. But what he does more than anything else is sort of model a nonchalant attitude and break the idols, shatter the boomer idols of the post-war consensus, and show and still remain standing afterwards. And that's something that you can, I don't know if I'd recommend doing it at work, but you could hypothetically copy that. With clavicular, there's absolutely no way you could copy this trajectory. I mean, you could look smacks. You could try to become like an Instagram manho or whatever you call them. Insta thoughts, man thought doesn't sound as good as man whore, I'm afraid. But regardless, I mean, well, there has to be some version. The male to male transsexual of Instagram. There has to be some snappy Zoomer neologism for that. They should do that rather than doing these stupid phrases like generational run. There doesn't seem to be any clavicular path. The only trajectory his career could take is that he becomes kind of the symbol of looks maxing. He becomes kind of like an Andrew Tate figure. He has a cult around him. But notice how there aren't, I'll say this about Andrew Tate and about other people. Do you notice how when I was in my 20s, there were like 10 or 15 of these man influencers, these mystery method people, these pickup artists. There was Chateau Hartis, there was Mystery, there was that guy that converted to Orthodox Christianity recently. Was it Roosh? There were tons of them. There were tons of them. There were a dime a dozen. All throughout the late 2000s and early 2010s, there were all of these pickup artists. They all said more or less the same thing. I think the Hartiste guy had more of a philosophical. He obviously was the most intelligent of them, but there were tons of these people. This was like a thing that you could be. This is something that people did a lot of back in the day, and the the problem is that I don't see how you could do that for you can't that's not the case for Andrew Tate, right? Andrew Tate is an icon of what we used to call pickup artists. But there's not like a class of Andrew Tate influencers. There's not like a bunch of people who are like Andrew Tate, but a little bit different. There's just Andrew Tate as I mean, maybe Sneeko is that like maybe, but I think he's more of a Twitch streamer, right? Maybe his brother. But these are all part of the same like circle, the same orbit of people. It's not like there is an ecosystem of people who are doing this thing. He just is the icon of that kind of thing, and no one else follows him. And so this is odd. And so the natural trajectory of clavicular is to make a big splash now and then immediately flame out and have your career go down in flames. That is your and it's like a speed run, right? It's like a speed run. It has a beginning, it has an end, and then whether you succeed or whether you fail, it's not a living thing. The speed run is not germinated. It's not something that you cultivate going forward. There's no community around your speed run. It's just put on the shelf and preserved for posterity as that thing that went on that one year. It doesn't grow or live or anything else like that. And it's funny. I mean, there were all of these. It's weird that this week has been really depressing. And first of all, there's the kind of elephant in the room is that there's been this series of very strange mass shootings that have all been from trans women. I think there's been two, maybe three of these shootings that have occurred in the last week. I'm not going to get into any of them specifically, but these people were all highly online people that seem to be suffering from some advanced stage of what we might call Blanchard's type 2 transsexualism, or as they say on the internet, autogynephilia. This is, and it's strange because my friend Endeavor, I remember a few years ago, he said, if transgenderism ever takes a huge hit, you are going to essentially see transgenderism turn into a suicide cult. I think he said that back in 2018. And of course, I guess this is a little bit odd, and this is an interesting thing that we've observed this year. It used to be thought that it was impossible for a single progressive issue to fail. And I don't think that transgenderism has actually failed, but it is sort of an element of the God that bled. Transgenderism was something that progressivism went all in on in between 2018 and 2023. And then all of a sudden, starting with Britain, starting with the UK, starting with the Tavistock Clinic, it all started getting rolled back one after the other, after the other, after the other. And this and what happened, what this is the essential thing is, does that mean that transgenderism as an ideology is over? Obviously not. It can only permanently die when the left itself permanently dies, because transgenderism itself is kind of the perfect expression of leftist ideas. It's the infinite transgression of boundaries for the fulfillment of hedonistic desire. That is, I mean, again, not the perfect one, I'm overstating it, but it is a representation of its ideals in the classic sense of things. And the problem for the transgender, this is what kind of makes Endeavor's prophecy biting, is that even though everyone knows that transgenderism is going to make a comeback the next time the left is in political power, it has to. There is nevertheless a spiritual crisis on the part of the transgenders currently, because as this phenomenon has receded, as you've had more and more mainstream people move back from the brink and try to recapture their credibility because they need to seize power now, the prominence that these figures have had, I mean, it used to be that trans people, Troons or whatever, they could walk into a room, they could announce their pronouns, and this would be something that the entire institution organized itself around. Now, I mean, I really kind of missed the brunt of this because it was a big deal in the university where I got my PhD. And you can see I was finishing that in 2017. But you could see the beginnings of it in that year, right? And then it got really bad in 2020. By that time, I was already in the corporate world. And so you could only kind of see it in relation to videos people took. But you can pick these things. You can pick up that these things are going on. But it was an easy observation that if you did anything wrong, you can always tell who's in power by how bad it is to transgress against any given identity group from the left. And you could get away with being misogynistic. You could get away with being anti-Asian. You could get away with all of those things. You could get away with being homophobic. But you could not get away, not now, obviously. You could, between 2019 and 2023, it was very difficult to get away with transphobia or any questioning of like the Black Lives Matter thing. Those were the two big ones, which meant, in effect, that if you were a trans woman, imaginary scare quotes around that, if you were a trans woman, you were on the top of the progressive heap. You were the thing that everyone wanted to talk about. And now you're not. Even though your cause will be resurrected from the ashes of history the next time the progressive movement feels confident again, which, may or may not be in a while. And hey, maybe the progressive movement will die in the ashes of the West's financial insolvency. That's another possibility. But what is definitely happening is that in the current moment and for the foreseeable future of the next 3 years, nobody wants to be associated with this and nobody wants to platform it. And as such, your whole marketing of yourself as this thing, as the new in thing, people either hold it against you or they don't want to talk about it. They absolutely don't want to talk about it. And I think that is what is triggering a lot of these. There's been a huge, in the last 2 years in particular, there's been a huge upswing of this. The population, regardless of what people say, I'm going to kind of be a heterodox thinker in this. I don't think that there actually is, certainly as a population itself, relative to other populations, I don't think that transgender women or male to female transsexuals are a very violent population. They are probably, if you did some adjustments, you could see that they had a higher proclivity towards things like mass murder. But then again, I said this before, my friend LP, I hypocrite, did this whole video about transgender serial killers, which, is a thing. And given how small the population is of transgender people, it's amazing how overrepresented they are. But I'm not so sure that we're really measuring like a direct causal relationship with this thing. For instance, I have no knowledge of the statistic, but I bet you, and I bet LP this, I bet you that if you looked at serial killers, probably about half of them would be left-handed, even though only 1 out of 20 people is actually left-handed. And I don't know, is it 1 out of 20, 1 out of 10? It's some near 10% of people in the real world are left-handed. Well, why is that? Why then are serial killers 50% left-handed? Is that because left-handedness causes them to want to kill and kill again? No, it's not. It's because unusual features about people that are epigenetic or have an epigenetic origin usually are linked to some amount of mutation. And and mutational load is concentrated. If you have one mutation, you're much more likely to have another. If you have a sort of normal genetic pattern, you're more likely to be healthy across all metrics. And of course, very few mutations are beneficial in any way, like vanishingly small percentages of them are. So you always want to have less of that. So usually, you see more left-handed geniuses and you see more left-handed serial killers. And the same thing is true for transgenderism. I'm sure that transgenders are overrepresented in, extreme fields as well. Other extreme, maybe, I don't know if come to think of it, I can't really think of any great transgender geniuses the way I can think of geniuses that have slept with the same sex, in the homosexual. Do you still say homosexual gay geniuses? That doesn't sound right either. But I can't think of that now, but I imagine that's what the source of it is. But in the last 2 years, there's been this enormous upswing of people who are in this lifestyle or associated with it who just go on killing sprees. And I think that this might be what we're witnessing is kind of the end of, to use the Zoomer terminology, this is the end of the transgender generational run. It was designed to seize social media platforms and to be the it thing for a very short amount of time. It ran its course and now it's being put on the shelf. And what do you do when your lifestyle is put on the shelf? It's not even political. One of the guys that was one of the killers in these shoot 'em up scenarios. The Charlie Kirk killing was obviously political. It was a leftist killing, and the guy was, I wouldn't say he was transgender. He was associated with that movement politically, not in an identitarian way. But it's not political in the sense that I think at least one, maybe two of these trans shooters they actually were like Trump supporters and indulge in like right-wing memes. I guess that's not really saying anything. Everyone indulges in right-wing memes because the right wing is the only political movement that can create good memes. But these people were pursuing this life, this sort of effervescent moment of internet energy. And then it ran out. Then it ran out. This is the story. And again, I can't psychologize people because it takes years. It takes years for these cases. We still don't know very much about the guy who killed Charlie Kirk. We still don't know very much about the guy who took a shot at Trump. We still don't know very much about, what is it, Audrey Hale or whatever her name is. Was that the person, or is that the Audrey from Twin Peaks? I forget. The Audrey Horne was the one from Twin Peaks. We still know nothing about the trans man shooter from 2 years ago. The details are always sort of cloaked in mystery. But or even was the Catholic school shooter that happened about 6 months ago, right before the Charlie Kirk assassination. Obviously insane, kind of politically indiscernible, but they had a mind that was poisoned by this frenetic internet energy. And the whole idea was that they were riding this energy until it just kind of logically self-terminated itself. And I think if you're an ordinary person who's living an ordinary life, you have moments, and this is something that doing this for 10 years, you kind of understand. There are moments that are incredibly generative and that feel like everything is going really fast in your direction or against your direction all at once. And then for other years, it feels like, well, people are putting this idea on the shelf. It hasn't been refuted, but people are putting this idea on the shelf. Either it has serious problems that need to be worked out, or its time hasn't come yet. Whatever, you're no longer the thing anymore. And if you want to talk about the thing, you're going to have to start involving yourself with ideas that are outside your specific wheelhouse. And I think ordinary people who live ordinary lives, or at least that have their values located a little bit more in the real world and not so much on this online space, there's no real problem taking a year or two where you're not the it thing anymore. I mean, for myself, I'll just say this: I never had a hotter year than 2018, 2019. That was the period building up to COVID was just the time when the thing that I was producing was the most relevant thing there was on the internet. Like, you were getting podcasts with like Worski, which was the hottest thing. The IBS scene was rolling, and I was never an IBS person, but that was just the time where the kind of thing that I was producing was really relevant, and that it felt like a second in 2018 was worth months of any other time before or after it. And post COVID, it didn't feel like that at all. And in the meantime, I've developed kind of interior to an existing community, interior to the dissident right sphere. I have a reputation, I believe, for being a fairly good writer and for being somebody who's a passable speaker and who has a certain level of insight into the culture. But it's not like you're riding the waves of the algorithm the way it was back in 2017, 18, and 19. That time is over, and I'm actually kind of happy that it's over. I don't even know what I would do with that frenetic energy. But there are some people who are just writing that. They organize their entire lives around min-maxing this desperate level of energy, and their role is just to get to the top or bust. Um, and so when I'm looking at all of these trans shooters, there was this other incredibly depressing story that I came across that really had nothing to do with the trans shooter phenomenon, but nevertheless kind of was linked in my mind to the generational run and the flame out of these AGP men in 2026 that seems to be happening daily. Or, I mean, I don't know. There'll probably be, I can't imagine this is going to be an actual statistically observable trend, but I think just anecdotally you can observe a little spike. But the news story that really caught my eye and affected me a lot more than any of these other tragedies was the story of this San Francisco woman, the San Francisco Chinese woman. And it just represented everything wrong with San Francisco. Now, this had happened, I think this might have happened even a year ago. This could have happened. It happened months or a year ago. This is not a new story. This came into the news because of the sentencing. This Chinese woman, this Chinese immigrant, came to San Francisco as a real estate speculator. She was speculating on real estate. She's this older woman. So, right off the bat, you're basically in California, making money off the market that is making everyone in the entire state miserable. There is a housing crisis in California, in San Francisco specifically. Nobody with families can buy houses in the Bay Area where all the jobs are. You're locked out of that. Yet this woman's coming in. She sees a crowded market and she goes, bam, me too. I need to get up there and I need to start self-optimizing. I need to get all of the money before anyone else can and corner the market, and then just be a winner. Win by winning more and try by trying harder and strive and strive and strive and strive. And who cares what the end is? I'm just going to grab the bags. Great. And in the process of doing this, she gets really wealthy. And for some strange reason, she's plowing ahead down a 25 mile per hour street at 70 miles an hour, 50 miles over the speed limit. And she crashes in to, to this family at a bus stop, a family of four at a bus stop going to see a museum in San Francisco. Now, just think how often do you see a European American family? I don't know if they were Christian or not. How often do you see a white family of four with two young children in San Francisco? And this woman just wipes them all out, kills every single one, going 75 miles per hour or 70 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. And the big thing that was going around now was that she basically got no jail time by pleading no contest because she's old. Because she's old and she shouldn't be driving. Great. People obviously were, and this is, I think this is kind of a little bit gauche, but a lot of people were online were speculating that because she was Chinese and the judge was Chinese, that there was some ethnic nepotism going on here. I think that's, I don't know, maybe, but I think that's fairly unlikely. To be quite honest, I think that's speculation. I think it's much more likely that your California judges are just shitlibs rather than Chinese nationalist ethno-supremacists. Although, God knows, there's a lot of overlap in the Bay Area between those two designations. But most likely, this is like a bleeding heart liberal decision. She's old. She can't control herself. She gets no jail time. Grandma needs to lose her license. Okay, great. So she's too dumb to operate a motor vehicle, but she's still speculating on real estate prices. And case in point, lest you think that her business acumen was sort of in the past, she literally, and admittedly, this is a rumor, right? The rumor is that she essentially transferred all her assets to relatives, to family relatives, before the trial to preclude the family of the deceased from seeking a civil lawsuit against her and seizing her assets. Which is, I mean, I'm sorry, but that's the least you could do is stand before the judge with your earnings in hand for a person that is essentially only functioning in this society as somebody who is optimizing their earnings. It's a generational run, though. It's a generational run. You got to run as fast as you can and get as many points as possible and strive. And then, I mean, who cares? Who cares what happens afterwards? Who cares what happens to the city? Who cares what happens to the families that get wiped out literally by your reckless acceleration? I mean, who cares? I mean, the people who died were not on a generational run. They were creating a new generation of people. Like I said, they were cultivating something that would exist after their own desire to grab the bags faded from the scene. But our society isn't organized around people like that. Our society is organized around people that optimize to the tens, go as fast as possible, and then suddenly, crash out or do something. I think I have slides here. I don't even know what I really meant to say. I mean, this is interesting for a variety of reasons. The generational run. Was there a generational run of The Distant, right? I've been having this back and forth with Academic Agent for the better part of a month or two. There's nothing really to say about it, but I did want to challenge myself to play devil's advocate. I was asking what I should talk about on this stream, and everyone wanted me to discuss the Academic Agent stream where he had Evelyn and Scrump Monkey on, and they discussed the end of The Distant, right? And obviously everyone knows that Evelyn is a trans person themselves or whatever. I don't want to say any more about it because I don't think it's really worthwhile dwelling on. But the problem, the obvious problem is with all of my interactions with this individual is there's one role, and I'm a Big Ten person. I will work with atheists or anyone as long as they're striving for the right outcome for the good, the true, and the beautiful. Even if they are heretics, even if they might have some, mental infirmities that should be addressed medically, that's not my job to be their psychologist or to get them proper mental health care. That's not my job. But the problem always with this interaction I've had with this group is they always want, both Evelyn and Scrump Monkey, they always want. I think they do good work, by the way. They do excellent work in terms of their description of realist politics. But every time I've interacted with them, they always want to be the hallway monitors of the right wing, deciding who's in, who's out, who's based enough, who's cringe. No. I'm sorry. Like that's the one role that I'm not comfortable with you serving in this. I mean, make art, make something that is interesting. Do something along those lines. Don't come and sort of organize a purity spiral, because my purity spiral is going to cut in the exact opposite direction, and it's not going to be in the same direction as yours. But I listened to the podcast, putting aside that kind of the elephant in the room there. There are some good points about mistakes that the distant right is making. And, look, this was always known. This is something that my friend Black Horse mentioned several times, and that, was you could see this. You could see this coming a mile away, and everyone knew this too. Everyone in America knew this. It was not just a European or a Canadian observation. That Trump's second victory would give the American right a lot of wins to a certain extent. It would certainly save us from a lot of pains, but it would ultimately facilitate a large identity crisis on the part of the right wing. And that is because there is sort of this weird dynamic that goes on in the left versus right world. And that is that the right is oftentimes most powerful on the back foot, whereas the left is only really powerful on the front foot. And so when Trump won, after the first 100 days, when there was this huge flurry of cuts and reorganizations, and people actually thought that we might be in the middle of a low-key regime change, which turned out not to be the case. But after those first 100 days, the motivation of the right wing kind of tapered out precipitously. And the same thing is true for the left wing. Sure, certainly, per places like Minneapolis and St. Paul, there are a core group of leftist activists that they just want to kick off as insurrection. They want to kick off another insurrection. They want to kick off another summer of love, a winter of love, maybe. They can't wait to get out there and fight for the cause. This is what they've always wanted. But everywhere else since 2024, the left has had a huge problem understanding how it was actually going to govern the country, because it was clear that, okay, sure, they could probably have another big riot in 2026, and maybe they could nickel and dime the Republican Party into losing the midterms. And this would certainly put an end to any ambition Trump had to redesign the American government, because they could infinitely tie up all their operations behind additional laws passed through Congress. They could do another impeachment, which I'm sure they would, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, it would basically end the possibility that we were actually experiencing a change in government. And very likely they could follow up a victory in 2026 with a victory in 2028. And, and then we'd be back on the progressive reservation once more. But even so, progressives understand that they're not going to have an easy time ruling the West. That any idea that getting rid of Trump would put the right-wing genie back in the bottle has pretty much evaporated. And what's worse, and this is what I think, there's a lot of people on the left who complain about this, and yes, I do occasionally read leftists. Obviously, the people who are out there doing Antifa 2.0 and trying to kick off another big insurrection or conflagration or riot in Minneapolis. They're very frustrated with the center left and the New York Times and the funders who are getting cold feet. But what the people from the New York Times, like Ezra Klein and Matt Iglesias, what they're reacting to, the reason why they're not going all in on the radical stuff the way they were in 2020, is they're reacting to their poll results, which show that a lot of the demographics that they brought over, they're not so loyal to the core Democrat vision of the future anymore. They will break away, which means that the idea that changing American demographics would lead to the eternal hegemony of the inner party is probably not going to pan out. And what the Democrats will inherit in 2026, possibly, is a country that is just completely ungovernable and is in a complete state of rebellion, and where their own core activists, not just the people they're paying, look, the people they pay will vote for them, but their core activist class might be completely shattered and fighting amongst itself, and unable to actually create anything that looks remotely like a ruling coalition, while foreign rivals just pick up the pieces on the periphery. That is obviously what the people in the New York Times are thinking and fearing, and the reason why they're getting cold feet. So there's this really weird dynamic playing out where there's not very much energy on the left and there's not very much energy on the right. The right's lack of energy is due to this identity crisis. The right only has an identity that is oppositional, and the left only has a vision that is utopian. The leftist vision of utopia is shattered by their electoral prospects becoming no longer inevitable. And their vision of a post-scarcity world also, I would argue, looking more and more out of reach, in fact, than it ever has before. Not least because the unipolar nature of world politics is apparently shattering. And so, what comes out of this is this weird limbo that we're in, and part of it's algorithmic, but this weird limbo that we find ourselves in, not just the death of discourse, but really the difficulty of any side making a move that's at all relevant or that's at all kind of pursuant to a broader vision. This is something that my slides are out of order as usual, guys. Forgive me. I don't know exactly what I want to say about this. What I will say is that it's interesting. Before I get on to the question of the label, the distant right, the most interesting thing that's happened in the last month has actually happened in Britain. And I'm kind of think that the ball is really epically in Academic Agent's court right now, because just as Academic Agent had his, well, I'm a progressive now, don't you know? Pardon me. Just as he kind of went in that direction and denounced the right wing across the board, what happened is the most promising and most interesting right wing candidate in living memory waltzed onto the scene in the form of Rupert. Is it Rupert Lowe? I think it's Rupert Lowe, right? This I don't even know really what his background is. He's some former leader. I know he was allied with Nigel Farage, and then he left and came back. He, like Cincinnatus, he literally has a farm. And now he's undertaking a project called Restore Britain. Now, obviously, Britain is just in complete dire straits. But on the other hand, like all right-wing oppositional movements, the fact that they're on a back foot clarifies their fundamental priorities in the way that I find most right-wingers' priorities in America is fundamentally unclear. They don't really understand what is going on. And so out of this comes Rupert Lowe with this message, sitting on the farm like he is Cincinnatus, and he says very matter-of-factly who he is, what his identity is as a British person. And he says, we're going to restore Britain. If 1 million people have to leave a year, then 1 million people will leave a year. This will be incredibly painful. And in those moments, you can see the formation of an actual solution coming into focus. Things are being said there that I think are going to echo through Britain. I don't think that Lowe is ultimately going to take power. But a step is being made, and it is the essential step across all of these interactions between the right wing and the left wing. And I could say an interesting parallel to Lowe's announcement of this, very stoic, matter of fact proclamation of what needs to be done in order for Britain to have what I would call demographic security. Demographic stability, demographic security is the only way forward. It is an existential question, and this is what we need to do to maintain that security. Otherwise, we'll be overrun in our own nations, and you'll be minorities in your own nations, and that will have a political consequence, as it already is, as it obviously has everywhere where people have entered into minority status. In my home state, in South Africa, halfway anywhere in the world where people become a minority, there are political consequences. Lowe is kind of offering language to describe that. And in the meantime, almost interestingly enough, a mutual of mine, an acquaintance of mine, Jeremy Carl, I think I've spoken to him once. Again, he's in a bunch of group chats that I'm in as well. He got an appointment in the State Department by Trump, and he's being grilled. And of course, Jeremy Carl very famously wrote a book called The Unprotected Class. And again, very good book. Everyone buy it. I highly recommend the book. It was kind of like the Jacob Savage article, The Lost Generation, before The Lost Generation became a smash hit. And, it outlines the things that we've been talking about for 10, 20 years online. It's not controversial, but it's refreshing to have it said with sort of force and in print, and for an audience that is probably boomer. And of course, so he gets into this position for appointment. He's being interviewed by Congress or a committee or some type. And of course, every Democrat is hammering him on this topic of white identity. What is white identity? Well, oh my God, what even is white identity? How would you describe it? Like the destiny argument. Disingenuous leftist tactic. Remember, guys, no identity is real because every identity can be decomposed into smaller identities. So there's no such thing as white identity. There are just individual European identities like English identity or German identity. And there's no such thing as English or German identity because English and German identity are comprised of things like Saxon identity or Bavarian identity or Welsh identity or people from Westphalia or people from East London or whatnot, 1,000 different ones. And don't forget, if you're Anglo-Saxon, you're half Anglo and half Saxon. And if you're English, you're part Norman. And there's the Viking invasions and whatever. You could infinitely decompress this. And if you were to go back and you were 100% Saxon, then you could deconstruct that as well. And so, every time this happens, this ridiculous game is played by the left, where no identity means anything because it can be deconstructed, and always selectively deconstructed, because as everyone obviously points out, the people who are grilling Jeremy Carl on this question of identity and what is white American identity, they have no problem talking about Black American identity or Asian American identity. In fact, they literally campaign upon it. They say, I'm going to talk to the Asian American community. Well, good Lord. Asian, like Asians in identity, if you can decompose England into its constituent elements that go down to the township level, that go back 2,000 years before they can be decomposed into Celtic and Norman and Saxon. Well, guess what? I think there might be some difference between somebody from India and somebody from Mongolia. You are using that Turks and Koreans are the same people. They're both from Asia. No one does this. Nobody ever does this. This is absolute pedantry and selective outrage. And I don't think anyone's really buying it anymore. But, either way, and we could go into the cows come. We could talk until the cows come home about disingenuous destiny attacks on words and word games that people play. That's not the important thing. The important thing, both with Rupert Lowe and Jeremy Carl, is the conversation is being mainstreamed around core political understandings, and the core political understandings that the people need to take and process are what is ultimately the state organized around in terms of identity. If we, as right-wingers, as people who are interested in the national project, cannot speak in real terms about the people that we represent, specifically I'm talking about the white peoples that we represent, the English, the Welsh, the Scottish, white Southern Americans, white Northern Americans, the various different peoples, if we cannot actually point to that thing and say that it has political interests and say that we are dedicated to its well-being, then no political progress can be made because it all just dissolves into the ether. Restore Britain is a project that has promise because it promises to be a collective awakening of identity. And I know James Lindsay's going to have a field day with that. Oh my God, awakening, woke right. But this is exactly what pisses off people like Seth Dillon and Joel Berry. I don't know how to say it. And, again, it doesn't hold up. Well, America is a propositional nation. Yeah, but it's not. I mean, it's a proposition undertaken by a finite set of people for their posterity, made up of their descendants. Everyone understands it, and even these boomer cons understand it when it comes to countries that they actually care about, like Israel. Nobody sits around wondering, oh man, what is a Jew? What even is a Jew? Like, when you think about it, aren't the Palestinians kind of Jews too? I mean, they probably, I've known many Palestinians that embrace Israeli values. So, like, and how can you prove that they don't embrace Israeli values? And aren't there some Jews that don't embrace Israeli values? And they're citizens too. Everybody knows how these word games exist, and everyone knows that it's absolutely bullshit. No one's under any illusions about what a Jewish state means. It's an ethnicity, or it's a group of ethnicities, just like whiteness is. It's a grouping of European ethnicities, of indigenous European ethnicities. Some more scattered than others. It's a grouping of smaller things, like all identities. No one's under any illusions about what that means when it comes to the Jewish state. And no one's under any illusions about what that means when people talk about the English people becoming a minority in their country in 20 years, 30 years, our children. I'm not British, but that's what we're talking about. That is what we're talking, and that will come with commensurate political penalties for the indigenous populations of the island currently, because as everybody knows, the second the progressives get into power, the second the coalition of the third world gets into power, they will immediately start seeing race again. They will immediately start enacting anti-white laws, and when they enact anti-white laws, no one's going to sit around debating over whether, I don't know, maybe because I'm British and the black guy next to me is British, maybe we're both equally as black as each other. No, of course they won't. They'll just act to preference their own people. They'll just act to preference their own group. And no amount of promising by moderates is going to change that fundamental political dynamic going forward. It's an awakening. It's an important battle. It's not one that's going on online. I mean, it's kind of passed from the online sphere at this stage. You either see it or you don't at this stage. You either see the reality of group politics or you stick your head in the sand and act like the rest of the boomers. But there's no way to avoid this. I have no doubt that I think Lowe is not going to succeed at his goal of taking over the British government. Maybe he'll even split the vote. But the important thing is to have the conversation about conscience. Now, ultimately, the problem, too, will be, for the British people in particular, is that in all likelihood, they're going to take a series of losses for the next 20 years before they're even organized well enough to wield power. The, the decline has been that bad. It's not just that we don't, that it's essentially illegal for indigenous European peoples to organize, for Christian peoples to organize for their own political interests collectively. It's not just that that is functionally illegal in Western countries. It's not just that there isn't any consciousness of it yet. The big problem is going to be, and this is what a lot of people on the right wing in America are suffering through currently, the second you actually understand the problem, you still have a secondary identity crisis. You still have a secondary question about how we conduct ourselves. What does it actually mean to be right wing? What do we actually want to accomplish? The big problem with the European countries is that they do not have a very thriving religious scene where they are. Most of the people there are atheists, which, don't get me wrong, there has been some good that has come from secular nationalism, a lot of bad too. I'm not nationalist myself. But when you lose, when you have to kind of take your project and put it on the shelf and no longer be charging straight into the bayonets, and you have to kind of put your faith in a higher power, that whatever you're producing in this moment is going to flower forward in another season. In order for you to stick together and be kind of one spirit with your comrade, with your neighbors, with people who share your fundamental values, you need a religious impulse for that. You need a dedication to spirituality for that. You need something higher that you believe in. Because otherwise you're just going to fracture. Otherwise you're just going to split and split and split and split and split. There's going to be 2 Restore Britain parties after the initial loss, and then there'll be 4, and then there'll be 5, and then every person will just be in their own little corner writing histories about how everyone else was a giant Zionist psyop, and that everyone was fooled but them. And if they had only listened to the real People's Liberation Front of Judea, then everything would have been different. I was on Dudley's podcast just the other week. I think it's gone live. I went on Aaron's podcast and I went on Dudley's podcast. I don't think the Aaron McIntyre podcast has been released yet. But on his podcast, Dudley asked me, well, look, there's been all of these crash outs over the distant right. Why? Why does this always happen? And the big problem, or the big words are failing me. The big deficit, the big absence on the right is that there is no real right-wing praxis. There's no, and I'm not saying there isn't if you're working with an organization like Return to the Land, either the Catholic one or the nationalist one, or if you're working with the OGC or Exit, if that is something you've dedicated your life to, or basket weaving or Seldings or Beowulf, or even your own church. Like if you are a part of an organization and you're working hard to build these things, maybe this doesn't apply to you. But for the most part, when it comes to the kind of stuff that we do here online, there is no real right-wing practice. There's no understanding of how right-wingers are supposed to organize themselves, about what it means to act as a right-wing person in the real world, in the real world, and what we really want to show for it. It is infinitely easier to get a left-wing praxis. I will say this is something that almost everyone has pointed to. When you're a left-winger, having kind of like a generational run is perfectly good praxis, because all you're doing is kind of blowing stuff up, creating a big commotion, and then capitalizing on the fact that someone has to handle the chaos in the interim. But the right wing does not thrive in chaos. It only thrives in order. And so necessarily, it's like, the left wing in its praxis is like the crazy 80-year-old Chinese real estate speculator speeding down the San Francisco hills at 70 miles per hour. Their practice is to grab as many gumdrops as possible, and when they finally crash out and blow up their car, to throw themselves on the mercy of the court and make sure that they can capitalize on all the things that they've gotten through their generational run. The right wing's practice is not like this. The right wing's practice is like somebody who's raising a family in San Francisco. You use all of your resources to get children, but the children need education, but the children need guidance, but the children need lots and lots and lots of money. And so inflation hits you harder. You need community, but the community is destroyed, so you have to build your own community. You need to have connections with family, but the family have needs of their own. And so what you have in any right-wing endeavor is this escalating things, this escalating list of needs, this ever-accumulating pile of rocks, this globe that needs to be lifted up to fight entropy, to create something that's meaningful. And unlike leftist projects, what we produce is delicate. It doesn't immediately pay out. It has to be nurtured. There's a lot of questions about right-wing praxis, but I'm kind of tempted to write an article. This last year I wrote an article, How Progressivism Died, How Conservatism Died. I also wanted to write an article about how the dissident right died. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about. I have been a defender of the title dissident right because it was the name that I chose for myself after the alt-right thing exploded onto the scene, and I wanted some way to differentiate myself from Richard Spencer's project. So I used that one, and I'm always irritated how everyone likes to use that as the thing they don't like. But let's take a step back and kind of examine this. Beyond the organizations that are created for specific purposes, there's a certain case to be made that the distant right as a concept, as a way of conceptualizing ourselves, is less than productive. And again, as I've written in the article, the dissident right is a completely the right wing in the modern world. The right wing is a completely oppositional identity. It just means we reject progressivism and we reject liberalism. We reject the entire project of progress. Doesn't mean that there aren't some good things that progressives have said sometimes, or that there have been some developments that have been good for humanity. I don't want to bring back slavery, although I think it is in some ways misunderstood in this historical context. But that it is still right to be right-wing is a negative descriptor. That's why when they do those little graphs about the clustering of political identities, all of the left-wingers are in this little ball and the right-wingers are like this cloud. The only thing that unifies right-wingers is they reject progressive untruths about the world. And so I wrote an article about this as well, the dissident right and its discontents. The reason why the dissident right can't go away is because it's just a name for rejecting certain untruths about the world. And so even if I don't like the title, I could completely get rid of the title and I'd still recognize that the liberal post-war consensus is a complete crock of horse feathers or whatever you want to say. Good Lord, that's like 19th century slang at this point. But either way, the ideas don't change regardless of whether the name does. That being said, it is always very hard to see what right-wing does for us, because it is very clear at this stage that the right wing benefits from having ordinary political categories and ordinary political animosities completely collapse in on themselves. I was talking to a family member this last weekend, and it was absolutely bizarre. And the reason why it was so bizarre was that they were just conceding, a very progressive family member I was talking to, and they were conceding every single point I was making about immigration, about the nature of affordability, about how California is governed about any number of things that right wingers complained about forever. And the only complaint was, well, yes, but Trump is rude. Oh, yes, but what about January 6th? What about the insurrectionists? What about the fascists? All the facts were in place. They might have even been open to the ideals, but always what was standing in the way was this image of the scary right winger, the people who were going to cruelly bring back all of the horrors of the 19th century and destroy the good life as they knew it in the 21st. And the same thing is sort of true. There's another pointless conflicts that keep on going on. I know my friend librarian of Kelowna was writing about this, where Trump got into office, he started saber rattling against Canada and against Europe, and immediately all of the European right wingers immediately jumped ship. They became so offended that half of them shut down their project, and people were saying, "Well, look, good Lord." Look, your leaders in Europe are about to import 100 million South Asians into your homelands, and you're worried about holding control over permafrost in the Arctic Circle? Are you kidding me? This is this is nuts. The this I mean I lived in Canada on and off for years. I can assure you, as somebody who's seen the development of Canadian urban areas, influxing millions of Indians into your living areas is going to matter a lot more than how many thousands of miles of tundra you control. I guarantee you that it's going to matter a lot more to your descendants as well. It's going to matter a lot more to your political environment. But no, and I sympathize with the Europeans. The point of pride, it hit such a nerve. It hit such a nerve and such a point of pride for them that it immediately made developing the necessary bonds between various right-wing parties in North America and various parties in Europe that much more difficult. Now, again, I'm not a huge fan of Trump's saber rattling. Sometimes I think it's necessary. If it's between rearranging who owns Venezuela and who owns Greenland, I find that much more preferable than having a huge war break out in North America, which everyone seems to be kind of angling to anticipate a larger theater of war these days, and it's very, very disturbing. But that being said, I think that the way that Trump is going about doing it is exactly the wrong way. Again, he's picking kind of the worst of two routes. He's neither refusing to touch the nettle nor grasping it tightly enough to make it his own, and as a consequence, it is stinging him. I'm copying another Yarvinism, but please forgive me. All of these things. I mean, what happens? What would happen if we woke up and there was just no more right wing? The ideas were still there. The organizations we created were still there. The leaders were still there, like Lowe and Carl, and rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. I wish there was a replacement for him. But the idea of the right wing was gone. It's hard to not imagine that would be productive. It's hard not to imagine that people would come up with some way to reorganize our societies and actually develop something that would be useful, that would be actually able to execute on some of the necessary and hard things that we need to do. There's no easy things to do. Regardless of what you want to say about the leftist activism is comprised of doing a bunch of very, very easy things. Nothing is easier than going out and doing a protest in your city when it's being applauded on your social media, and when you know that the prosecutors aren't going to actually charge you with insurrection and throw you in jail for 5 years, as did a few people from January 6th, or perhaps even more than a few people from January 6th. That is the easiest thing to do. They don't have these professional leftists don't have anything to do anyway. They're just sitting around. They're bored. Protesting popular political movements by desecrating art is easy. It's fun. The kind of actions that people like Jeremy Carl and Rupert Lowe are talking about are not going to be fun. They're going to be politically costly. And as soon as people start doing them, then what's going to happen is that all of the energy that you're feeling right now, looking at Lowe put on the kind of Cincinnatus routine and watching Jeremy Carl do the Mr. Smith goes to Washington routine, all of that good energy is going to flow out of the room. And you're going to be left only with your principles and only with your determination to go on. And none of us can really control whether these politicians are ultimately successful. But I will say this, if they're not successful, the only road to survival is going to be to undertake a new set of very, very difficult things. There's no way that the people who are interested in modern leftist politics as they now stand are going to be interested in the same kinds of actions. They're not going to feel the same way. But we could get people who are genuinely worried about the future of their children to push in the right direction and to start getting invested. Language is a way to achieve it. Talking about identity and commitments to future generations. Those words are powerful. Once an identity is acknowledged as existing, as a real type of thing that has a real substance to it that can be harmed, just think of how much mileage Israel gets to the potential harm done to the international Jewish community. Same thing is true for any other identity group or any other political group. The entirety of the CCP in China, the most successful political party on the globe right now, it's not organized around dialectic materialism. It's organized around ethnic Chinese nationalism. It is essentially the two managerial totalitarian regimes of hyper nationalism and hyper socialism met in the middle and become one, as had been always prophesized by the people who saw the total state looming on the horizon. It is sort of the optimal way to play the political game. But if any of the things that we value, and any of the people that we are duty bound to are going to have a chance in this world, we have to start thinking in the same way, collective and long term, and with some kind of spiritual dimension to our praxis. This is why I want to get back to the post-progressive praxis. Well, maybe it's like the post-progressive praxis is a better word for it than the right-wing praxis. We're all past this idea that history is going to push towards some utopia. What we're talking about is survival for our people, for our children. What we are talking about is being able to practice our religion and being in communion with a higher power. Those are the real things. Everything else is secondary. Everything else are just scrawled theories and meaningless discussions that are going on online. I mean, the thing is, like, I love to talk about online discourse and to explain how the latest round of discourse means that it's truly dead. But since the death of Charlie Kirk, I can't even do that because nobody is even doing political discourse anymore. There's discourse as entertainment, which I think that even people I kind of admire, like Rhetorically Defective or Andrew Wilson, are in that category. There's not discourse in the way that I would imagine it, and nor really should there be, because really the only thing that matters right now is, are you a utopianist progressive, or have you gotten past that? And if you have gotten past utopian and progressivism, the idea that technology and dialectic materialistic history is going to deliver unto us some more advanced state where the struggles of humanity have been essentially obsoleted by our relationship to some kind of system of theory. If you've gotten past that post-progressive promise, then it's on you to define yourself by the positive things that you value. Let me know what you value. I know what Rupert Lowe values. That's one of the reasons why his speech was so powerful. He values the British people. And in passing, I don't know how religious he actually is, but he seems to value the British faith or the British faith, the Christian faith, which is the faith of Britain. It is the king is the defender of the faith, and the faith that he defends is Christianity through an Anglican lens. That is what the faith is of your British Isles. I'm sorry, pagans. That is, it's always been that way. And before that, there wasn't even a solid religious identity or a consolidated English identity to begin with. So, but there it is. At least that answers the question. And this is sort of the challenge to the people who are post right wing, people like Nima Parvini. I don't really care about your theory. I care about the things you're fighting for. What things do you actually want to save? What are the things that you want to reach for? Other than just the bags, other than just the clout, other than just the edgiest new thing that's going to come across your radar. I need to know what you value. I need to know what you can't leave behind. I need to know what you'll sacrifice for. Lowe says he values Christianity and the British people, and we know he wants to sacrifice for it because he says the coming actions will be incredibly painful. And so that's the statement that I'm looking for. What types of things are you willing to tolerate painful actions to pursue? And what are you going to do? I misspelled praxis. Isn't that wonderful? Well, obviously, spell check is not in my praxis, but I don't think many people actually look at the slides. The slides are just there to guide me, and I write them in the last 5 seconds as things that kind of guide the talk along, so to speak, even if there's not a lot to talk about. The subject that's kind of interesting, that's kind of falling into place right now is, let's say that discourse has already died and that this week is not an exception. This year is not an exception. Just discourse is just no longer going to go on online. The question now is only how many people who are otherwise insulated from the discourse online are ultimately going to swear allegiance to the greater causes that we actually value, of faith, of family, of peoplehood, of the future of humanity. How many people are going to actually commit to those things rather than just commit themselves to a life of hedonism and to insane utopian projects of fully luxury automated space communism? And those questions about commitment, about converting people to being true believers, they fundamentally can't go on in the speed that is the internet. Not that the internet won't play a role in that entirely. But when you think about Joel Berry's audience or Seth Dillon's audience, what's actually keeping them in place? There are a lot of people that listen to Seth Dillon and Joel Berry's statements. And look, let's be honest here. If Seth Dillon and Joel Berry, if what their thing was came down to a series of interactions on Twitter and YouTube, and the good Lord knows I've had a lot of them. I guess I've only had one debate with Joel. I've only had one debate with Joel. I don't think I've ever talked to Seth. Joel Berry. I've had numerous with their people that are kind of in their spheres, like Wokel Distance. Fair enough. I never talked to James Lindsay. But look, guys, I mean, if Twitter were the real world, if Twitter were the place where this battle was happening, we would have already won it. Their arguments are absolute bullshit. They get torn to shreds in 5 seconds. The propositional nation, they've been saying that for what? I mean, first of all, it's been a talking point of the American right for 20, 25, 30 years. If you want to go to more primitive forms, it's been a talking point of America for almost 100 years at this stage. It's been part of the core liberal propaganda of the 20th century. But it's been manifestly ridiculous for 5 years. No one has any right to believe any bullshit about propositional nations post the woke era and post COVID. That is absolute bullshit. Nobody believes that this nation is organized around some kind of guarantee of liberty, or that the ruling class gives a shit about the Constitution, or that we're in this colorblind era, and the only problem is like a few bad actors from universities. Nobody believes that. And in the absence of that promise of a propositional nation, in the absence of advancing or creating a propositional nation inside a world where other people are playing identity politics, the understanding just completely disintegrates away. You once you realize that you're no longer in control of the country, you can no longer make an appeal to the status quo that a propositional country is even a reality. And then you're sitting around trying to argue with people who hate you that a common principle of restraint, which they have already declared they do not believe in, is what binds you together in a nation and allows them to use your tax money for their political causes and to bring over more clients to funnel their political machine. Uh, Again, like, people are like, oh, you're going to debate Seth Dillon or Joel Berrigan? I could train an AI to do it. It's not even an AI. I just tell the LLM to ask 5 or 6 questions, and then I watch the liberals twist in the wind when they cannot essentially convince their audience that it's no longer 1997. But still, so sure. If the world was YouTube and Twitter, Joel Berry and Seth Dillon and James Lindsay would have already lost. They have not lost because there are a number of people that, while they understand the problems with the liberal vision that people like Joel Berry put across, they do not really understand an alternative yet. And one of the main reasons why they don't understand an alternative to the vision is they have not seen people in their real lives actually live out what an alternative would be. The most powerful weapon that people like James Lindsay have in their arsenal is going to people who are not perennially online or do not know people who are kind of more classically right-wing, shall we say, going to people like that and convincing normal people that all of us radicals are just cuckoo people, we're incels in our mother's basement, don't look at the man behind the curtain, just turn away, go back to Ronald Reagan and call it a day. And you can see this in the people who defect from the right, like Pedro Gonzalez. Again, somebody who I typically liked his writing beforehand, but his attacks against the right are always personal attacks. Because that's where the money is made. That's where they connect with their audience. Not that the arguments that the right wing puts forward are incorrect or that we're not pointing to real problems. Not that the questions we raise have any answers that liberals can provide. Not that the liberal status quo of the 1990s has evaporated. I think most honest people know that it has. The real argument holding everyone back from making the necessary changeover is everybody who believes this way is a loser. And if you follow them, you're going to be on a road to disaster. You're going to be on the road to perdition, as they used to say. That's their strongest weapon in their arsenal. And if you can puncture it, that is where the real dialectic lies. I think that will happen as people get more familiar with our arguments. They'll be able to see them come out of more people's mouths. They'll hear the questions that I asked Joel Berry being asked by people who aren't, I'm not a freak, I don't think, but if you were a normie Republican, if you were a follower of James Lindsay that watched my debate with Joel Berry, you might assume that I'm an internet freak. Once they hear that coming from people they genuinely respect, I think that the fortunes of the old conservative movement will decline precipitously. That is where the real praxis is, at least dialectically speaking. But there's just so many other areas that need to be addressed. It's always the fallout of last week, isn't it? I mean, certainly, and I'm in the process of writing an article about this for another publication. Hopefully it'll get published this time. But certainly one of the main failings of right-wing praxis that we've seen in the last week was the whole can conservatives produce art spiel. This is the Bad Bunny versus Kid Rock performance that everyone was wringing their hands over. Turning Point USA, Bad Bunny. What doesn't to say about Bad Bunny? I mean, it's just so objectively bad music. I can't remember who said this. I think it was LP from I Hypocrite. He said the halftime music, the background music, it sounded like you just went to a modern Casio keyboard and then press the autoplay button for Latin reggae tunes and then just started rapping over that. And it's and unless you think that the flow of the lyrics it's just I don't completely judge hip hop. There have been some lyrical forms that have really been great that have come out of hip hop. I don't know if any of them have been genius, but lest you think that you're saying sort of like a wordsmith at work and just brilliant stuff that you're hearing in Spanish. Well, if you translate it to English, just like F this, F that, the typical hip hop stuff. It's the crudest stuff imaginable. And and this is one of the worst halftime shows. I mean, I don't know, the worst one I've seen. I can't say that I've made a practice of watching halftime shows regularly. Wasn't the last halftime show the Taylor Swift one? Am I misremembering that? I feel like it was. But either way, the it was really bad. And I think this is sort of the idea. Turning Point USA has this fundamental problem, which is that right-wing organizations really only make sense when they're led by strong men. And there was no replacement for Charlie Kirk. As a matter of fact, there is a worse than replacement for Charlie Kirk. You've got Erica Kirk, who, well, I'm sure Erica Kirk is a very good person, and my heart goes out to her for the murder of her husband. But she is just not in a position to lead a highly dynamic organization of young men. She's just not. She's not a grieving widow with two young children, is not in a position to do that thing. I don't think Charlie Kirk thought this through. Obviously, he didn't. I mean, I haven't looked over my arrangements, to be quite honest. Nobody at even my age really thinks that they're going to die in the next year. And certainly no one at Charlie's age, who is 10 years younger than me, or almost 10 years younger than me, thinks they're going to die at his age. And so, this idea, I'm sure he thought that he would be 70 when he died and Turning Point would go to Erica as a retirement project or something like that. And there would be a whole new generation of people that he specifically hand groomed to be the executive force behind the, board oversight run by Erica. That was probably his vision. But that didn't happen. And so now Turning Point is this huge mess. Nobody's in charge. It has all of this energy, but it has no idea what to do with it. It has no idea whether to cultivate leaders or anything else like that. It's just running. And they're trying to get wins. And they see that Bad Bunny is going to be the headliner for the new Super Bowl. And oh my God, everybody already knows that Bad Bunny is bad. If it wasn't in the name, you could just watch the stuff he has on YouTube. It's not going to go over well with Middle America. So what better time to have an alternative halftime show? And they find the typical idiotic conservative bullshit. It's all retro nostalgia from the 90s. It's Kid Rock. It's 1997. I mean, they could have even, at least, if they had gotten Creed instead of Kid Rock, at least they could have done the nostalgia meme that people keep on posting around Twitter about Super Bowl halftime shows when they show you what a Super Bowl halftime looked in 2003, and it looks so much more optimistic and vibrant. And whatever, but either way, it's the problem is that everybody, even though Kid Rock is probably a better artist in some abstract sense than Bad Bunny, not that either one is very good. Abstractly, probably Kid Rock is better. Bad Bunny's show was forward-looking, and the Turning Point USA's show was backward-looking. And everybody knows what wins in a contest between the future and the past. The future always wins in a contest between the future and the past. It is not controversial. And so everybody, even if they liked the TPUSA alternative show better, even if it was kind of a success as a first of its kind, everyone afterwards was going, oh, wow, conservatives can't produce art. And then they were right. And Christopher Rufo, of all people, says, well, gee, guys, we have tons of money sloshing around in our big vaults. There's just no audience and no creators doing conservative art or doing right-wing art. And of course, that is the biggest crock of bullshit. Like, I have a whole shelf of artists behind me that do fiction and poetry and historical fiction and histories and any number of creative short stories. Like Lomas has an entire published, look, not him only. For the Redwood Society, I compiled a huge list of right-wing publications, organizations, print magazines, and there were like 80 entries, easy. It was a very easy list to put together. And I didn't even scratch the surface. There were so many publishing companies, and each of those companies has multiple original authors that wrote books just for them. There are no lack of, and for every one of those, there are 100 artists in our spheres that haven't even finished publishing, that are creating in there, and that haven't even been able to get into print. The idea that there's no artist producing or that there's no demand for it is absolutely ridiculous. The problem is that conservatives like Rufo don't understand what art is. They don't understand that it's not supposed to be targeted at an existing demographic. It's supposed to be aspirational. You're supposed to forcefully show people what you want. This is something that it's a praxis that the left has, that the right does not. The left understands that visions of what a future should be exist for their own sake. For their own sake, aspirational visions of the future exist. And the right wing doesn't have an understanding of that. But more than that, they don't really even have a practice of creating themselves. I mean, like I said, there's hundreds of artists creating. There's all these people who are doing publications. Yes, there are. But I've noticed one thing, being both in leftist communities and right-wing communities. When left-wing writers write, they always write in groups and collectives, and it's very, very catty and feminine. But there is a whole support network that they're built off of. Now, like I said, the reason for that is the left is an actual thing, and the right wing is the absence or the opposition to a thing. So it's not really reasonable to expect there to be an automatic community. But damn, if you can't see the utility of a prestige economy that is completely internal to your political movement. Creating a prestige economy for great art just has to be the next praxis that we develop as right-wingers. Or I mean, maybe not as right-wingers. You know, maybe just as non-progressives, as emissaries of a new future vision for humanity that is not the progressive pablum, that is not the technocratic bullshit dystopia. This is one reason people always, every time people ask me the art question, they always follow, and maybe this is just, I know I've answered this 1,000 times. Why not anime? Why not anime? Why not anime? Well, I mean, kind of. If you want to use anime as your inspiration to create something, that is a good start. But there's a big problem with anime. You know, it comes from a foreign culture as kind of an homage to Western. So people are thinking of like Frien and Cowboy Bebop and I don't know, there's a tons of these like Victorian style animes. The Victorian motifs are very popular. The Japanese have a very, very positive image of old European culture, much more positive than ours, certainly. But this is, you're looking at your own culture through an alien reflection, which means that it's naturally degraded from what it should be. And furthermore, it's anime is infested with two things that are poisonous to real art. It's infested with nostalgia, which I find, nostalgia is semi-poisonous. I see it you could argue that it is present also in things like Tolkien, although I would argue it's qualitatively different. And it's infested with nostalgia, and it's also infested with romanticism. And I think romanticism, again, it has its place. Many great pieces of art, including Thomas Carlyle, including Jane Austen, have incorporated elements, including Goethe, have included elements of romanticism in their works. But pure romanticism is absolute artistic poison. And it is, someone says it's goon coded. Well, I mean, anime is goon coded because romanticism is goon coded. It looks like some teenager's fantasy of how reality is and not actually how reality works in a real way. And so look, if you want to do this, you have to take it a step further. You have to actually figure out what you like about this thing and how to turn it into something that is actually interfaces with our reality in a deeper way. And that step is never taken. Well, I mean, it's not never taken. I rarely see that step taken. It could so easily be done, it seems, in a world where you can create videos from generative AI. Unfortunately, having a video created by generative AI robs a lot of the organic dimension that is critical for pure art, but you could at least use it for rapid prototyping. I mean, I don't know. I mean, who knows? That's the engineer in me speaking. This is something that I think that I'm thinking to myself here. There's all of these elements. There is an element where I think right wing or non progressive creators have kind of dropped the ball at taking the next step. Part of it is the lack of a prestige economy. Part of it is not exactly knowing how to integrate pessimism and optimism together in a way that is both realistic and also aspirational. But that is a huge problem. I think we're discovering a lot of things. Also I've noticed here the whole woman question. People are talking about Sarah Stock today again. I don't want to relitigate that, but I don't know what was going on this time. There's all of these people who are going after Brett Cooper, who is just the most. There's nothing offensive about Brett. There is nothing either offensive nor interesting about Brett Cooper. If you told like an LLM to generate the median millennial woman and then 3D print her into like a flash vat and make her an influencer, you get Brett Cooper. That's what Brett Cooper is. There's nothing offensive about this woman. She has standard MAGA talking points with, a little twist of lemon. And I mean, and she's way over promoted. I mean, that's obvious. Like, all e-girls are way over promoted. With the exception of Aiden Paladin, I have never seen an e-girl, even e-girls I like, is like they're terribly over promoted. Like, I'm not going to mention them because I want to maintain good friendships, but Aiden Paladin is the only e-girl I've ever seen that is not horrifically advantaged by an algorithm or by people that want to push them to the front. That being said, everyone was losing their shit over Brett Cooper because she smiled at clavicular. And people were maybe the rumors are true, but people were inventing all sorts of sordid rumors about this woman. Look, this is not how you solve the woman question. You don't solve the woman question by showing up to every new e-girl's doorstep and accusing her of adultery. Like, it doesn't work. I mean, you're going to be wrong just as much as you're right. And it's a really, really bad look to just go around accusing women of adultery, even if they are e-girls, even if they are over promoted, even if they don't produce good content. The only way to deal with e-girls is to walk away from the endeavor entirely. And I still haven't figured out a good way to deal with the situation. I have unlike most right wingers, there have been a number of creators that I've really loved their content, and but the problem is that the the girls that have great content never get promoted, and the girls that do get promoted and get big have a tendency of creating scandals either through sexual impropriety like Sarah Stock or through just betraying the movement as several like Ashley St. Clair, or through some combination of sexual impropriety and betrayal like Lauren Southern. This just happens. It happens like clockwork, and it's horrifically embarrassing. It makes everyone look stupid. It allows our enemies to go forward and tell all the young people that the value that ordinary sexual values, that family values are totally impossible in the modern world. And it's not a game anyone should be playing. The only proper solution is just to completely walk away from political e-girls. Somebody called them politifoids. It was Newsfist. Newsfist called them politifoids. I think that's a great word for online political women. Politifoids. It sounds like a transformer. Politifoids, more than meets the eye. No, I don't want to see more than meets the eye on your average politifoid, but somehow you always do. They always transform into some horrific later stage creation. And I'm not there for it. But, the question is, how do you not throw the issue is we still live in the modern world. There still needs to be a place for women to be supportive. And there are genuine artists that do great work. How do you fix this problem? Well, I don't know. I noticed one interesting thing, and that is that with this whole, the Amelia thing from the UK, is that now in nationalist rallies, girls are just showing up cosplays as that pink-haired girl who's a nationalist from the public service announcement, where the life of Charlie. I think it's Amelia, right? Amelia. And it's I call it the pink void. It's interesting. I think that the way you handle women in any political movement is just create a space for them. Promote your cause, hoist your banner, be absolutely clear about the rules for the space and what you're expected to do. And then build it and they will come. Build it and they will come. Like I was saying with the boomers, they're not staying where they are because they're so convinced by Joel Berry's great arguments for the propositional nation. They're staying where they are because they don't understand. They can't see what they could possibly be a part of that comes next. If you build a space for boomers and women, they will naturally come. But I think that this kind of gets back to the final thing. The final thing is that regardless of our political fortunes in this time, it is going to be a very long time before any of these necessary elements are built. We're going to have a lot of victories in that time, but more than that, we're going to have a lot of losses. There are going to be a lot of horrible things that come out of the present order, that come out of the present moment, I should say, as the present moment declines. We are seeing the beginnings of the solvency crisis across the Western world. And it's not going to be pretty. I don't know exactly what's going to come out of this moment. But I do know that it needs a political response. But just more than that, there's this overwhelming feeling of pessimism against all things. I know my friend Kevin Dolan from the Exit Group wrote an argument against pessimism this last week. I only read half of it. But he said, you really underestimate how bad things are right now, and how much happier you'll be, and how much more optimistic you'll be when our current order collapses and there's a new horizon for doing things, and producing a world for yourself. That, if we can see through the mist of this present moment, if we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, everything is going to kind of start making sense. And I want to agree with that. I feel like I can't, something emotionally. And when I did this in 2016, it felt like, oh man, our opponents are just idiots. And once we refute all their arguments, they'll be humiliated and we'll basically just ascend in the absence of any alternative to us. But the last few years have shown, okay, we humiliate our opponents. And what happens is we don't ascend. The discourse space itself just dies because nobody knows how to actually execute on anything that is truthful. The future of humanity, in whatever form it takes, lies outside the Overton window of what ordinary normie people are willing to consider. And so instead we just sit around and watch everything get worse. And since I've realized that, it's hard not to just think, oh, well, my entire life is just going to be a series of years where the number of opportunities for me just gets lower and lower and lower. And the number of good things decrease and decrease and decrease until maybe at the end of my life, like Moses, I'll be able to look off into the distance and see the promised land that my children will inhabit. And that will be enough. Like that last vision, I'll be able to see the beginning of spring. But before then, it'll just be winter. It'll just be winter. And we're going to have to find, not that there won't be any good moments inside of it, not that there won't be any moments of levity, or not that there won't be any moments where we kind of see hope and feel it everywhere, but just that the trajectory of everything is not going to be in that direction in the next 2 decades. And I don't know who's right, me or Kevin Dolan. I hope Kevin's right. I hope I'm wrong. But I think today in particular, heading into Lent, the idea and the spiritual praxis lying at the heart of all of this is to kind of find optimism in the pessimism. Find God in the desert. In the desert of the real. Welcome to the desert of the real. And this is something that I think is challenging. I think that it's a muscle that we always talk about, but don't really understand how to exercise properly. I mean, I want the early spring. I want to be able to see something that's emerging from the ashes. But I'm wondering if it's not better that we kind of learn to live inside a moment of mourning. I think in all of this, there was the article that Morgoth wrote. Someone wrote under it, the stupid Warhammer thing. He's like, we're going to lose, Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe has hoisted the banner in like that character Gavriel Loken from the Horus Heresy books. The armies of the War Master are upon us, and we're destined to lose. But when the War Master comes, he'll find me with my chainsword in my hand and my bolter at my side, fighting for the Emperor's vision. That's noble, right? Then that wasn't even his article, but that's the spirit everyone has, right? I think in order to be an optimist, in order to be a true optimist, in the way that G.K. Chesterton once said in his book Orthodoxy, you need to have this ability to live inside the desert and to walk through it and be unscathed by it. And I think This is why spiritual strength is so important. This is why the religiosity of a people is the first step to them developing. I've known many spiritually masterful Indians, but at least the ones that have come recently, at least the ones that hang out online. What is the kind of thing that they do that's a lot like like what adolescent boys do, right? When they lose, they cry and they plead and, oh my God, we're doomed, run away, woe is me, take pity, Sar, take pity, give me your pittance. And when they win, I am the best ever. You're nothing to me. I'm the greatest thing that's ever lived. Woohoo! I'm a virtual god. This is the mark of people who are not spiritually situated in themselves. The person that is the mature person, the person that actually has spirituality, is able to function inside the desert of their lives and move through them because they can see the light of some higher power. And I really want to put that to my European viewers here. Certainly, you're aware of the fact that what makes you strong is kind of the fatal realism you see in somebody like Rupert Lowe, and not the boomer golden retriever optimism of someone you see like Boris Johnson, right? You know that you should trust the kind of fatal realism of the Rupert Lowe character. But I think in order to maintain that, you have to have a core spiritual vision. You have to be cultivating a relationship with a higher power. And I don't think that anybody in human existence has been able to genuinely have a relationship with a higher power that has not been expressed through a genuine religious impulse towards God in one form or the other, and a genuine life of prayer and religious practice. If you're European, if you're an atheist, I don't want to make the joke, I repeat myself. But if you find yourself in one of these positions where you're facing down the pessimism of our moment, why not try to use this time, this Lent, to kind of come into focus with a spiritual tradition of one form or the other, even if you haven't quite come to the point of believing yourself. This is the path to discover a future that you can believe in, regardless of what ultimately happens in the political war, regardless of what happens geopolitically or technologically or with the economy. This is the beginning of being able to fight for something in the real world that you believe in, is to have something outside the world that you believe in even more. And I'm one to talk because although I have the reputation of being this religious person, my prayer life is very inconsistent. And like I said, like most modern people, unless it's right in front of me, I can't seem to bring myself to believe it. But we've got to try. We've got to learn to cultivate some aspect of that primal spiritual mastery. And as all great spiritual masters have pointed out, it starts in the desert. Anyway, guys, that's the end of the lecture portion of this stream. I guess we'll go to the super chats here. I think the Entropy link is there. Okay. Well, I will re-up the Entropy link if you guys want to donate. Doesn't look like there is as many donations today. There were tons last week. So thank you guys for joining me this Shrove Tuesday. I think for Lent this year, I will be I'm definitely getting off of Twitter. My brain needs to take a big break from Twitter. I think that for my own sanity's sake, I need to get off of Twitter. And I need to Probably some dietary fasting would be good too. I usually give up sugar, desserts, only eat during the meals of the day. And, I don't know, maybe something more radical for Holy Week. We'll see. And I'd like to do Bible readings more too. I think saying prayers is hard for me. I think reading them is a little easier. And it might be a good place to start. Anyway, guys, let's do the super chats then. Oops. All right. I should have checked this. Guys, also, since I do have about an hour to kill and no one's really super chatting or entropy chatting, please feel free to put a at reply in my YouTube chat that I also will work. Maybe I can really quickly tweet this out again so I can get some questions. Otherwise, we'll have to end it early. Not that I really care. I mean, you guys were so generous last week that I can hardly complain. Like I'm way past my my quota for this month for sure. But let me just retweet this anyway. All right, guys, let's just start on the entropy chats. I think the real big problem is that a bunch of systems are down this time. So we'll see if also I've seen in the past that people have there have been like 2 sessions in entropy that have been going at the same time. I wonder if that's the thing that's going on right now. I hope not, but no, it looks like it's still the same one. Well, let's keep on going here. All right. Seneca for $3 USA says, time to grab my dinner and listen to Uncle Dave talk about the good old days of political discourse. Well, you know what channel you tuned into. I always want to do one about culture, but culture shows are so much more difficult to do because I have to actually compile lists and write out much more detailed outlines. I could go over like my favorite science fiction books or whatever. That's really hard to do. It is really hard to do. I mean, I don't know. Have I ever had a successful one where people always ask me like, what are your favorite rock albums or your favorite alternative bands? It would be fun to do that, I think. But it's also really like, for instance, if I did one on 90s alternative music, first of all, I'm not going to do like my favorite albums of all time. That's a stupid thing to do. Like, how can you possibly compare Nirvana to Beethoven or, Dave Brubeck to, Bill Monroe? I mean, these things are ridiculous comparisons. Extra genre comparisons of music are on their face kind of ridiculous. So I guess I'm left with the idea of doing like individual genres. But then, what if I did a show on like alternative music or folk music? Like a small subset of the audience would actually be interested in that. It would be really tiny. It would also kind of be like backwards looking as well. So there's difficulty with that as well. Ben White for $5 USA. I never realized how widespread sports betting had gotten among my age group until this month. During a Super Bowl watch party, a lot of guys were more focused on their bets hitting rather than cheering for their team. Are Zillennials cooked? Well, this whole betting economy is just the most depressing thing that I've ever seen. It is absolutely degenerate. And it's sad too. It's so sad. It's one more layer of reality sitting in front of our actual experience of reality. We're not, and by definition, people lose money on it. The gambling industry does not work unless the people who are doing it on average lose money. And since this is not an investment environment, there's not really any real information asymmetry. I mean, you can try to hack it, you can try to count cards, but how many people who are betting on sports actually are trying to beat the sports betting prediction algorithms? It's ridiculous. I don't know. Everything about Zillennials makes no sense to me. The way they've organized their lives is depressing. And the only thing that they seem to care about is making the line go up. And they of all people must know. They of all people must know that line going up does not equal good. They lived through line go up does not equal good. They've seen every aspect of line go up and no aspect of quality of life go up. I mean, if you're a millennial, why not take a chance on something like the religious life? Why not try to do something radically different? Because sports betting, it doesn't even look cool. It's not even like poker. I mean, why not just play poker? Poker is more fun. Ben White for $3 USA. Happy Shrove Tuesday, Dave. I hope you are prepared for some holy prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. I'm giving up sweets and diet soda this year because I can't give up meat. Also, nice California map. Yeah, I decided that I would. I figured I wanted to have a giant map of the state so that I could both teach my son where things are and also kind of, I don't know, part of me kind of wants to put pins where we are holding meetups and doing organizing just so I can get a visual understanding of where everybody is. Because I thought it'd be kind of very old school and cool to do it that way. I'm not so sure necessarily, not that there would be much revealed by a pinned map, but it would be kind of fun to have people tune in and I think it'd be kind of fun to see it visually, and it's not really revealing any private information to have a bunch of pins stuck in a California map. But anyway, thanks for the super chat. I'm going to move on here. Boris for $20 USA. Tips for surviving on a liberal university campus. Well, I did do an entire video on it. Look, there's several ways I find there's a lot of ways to answer this question. And I guess I'm going to have to take a long time answering it if I want to get more questions. So people aren't even at replying me in the thing. I've got absolutely no questions to answer here. But let's see. Look, what are the challenges of college? Well, the first challenge that I noticed going out of college were that girls were harder to date. This and social and friends were harder to get. When you're in high school, it's really easy to get girls and to meet friends because everyone's stuck in the same environment for 8 hours a day almost. And the girls can't be pursued by older men. So it's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? And when you get to college, it's a free for all. And I hate using this pickup artist term, but the SMV of the women just skyrockets and the guys does not. And you just feel like you're completely, at odds with yourself socially. So I guess socially speaking, find what your passions are, find what your hobbies are, and then just jump into them. Give yourself a strong hobby getting out of college. Now, on top of that, find one or two skills that you can get professionally good at. I know people say the typing is not useful anymore in the age of LLMs. I still think that it is. All the writing skills are also still useful, even in the age of LLMs. But even if it is sort of a redundant skill to what generative AI can do, it's still worth cultivating because there are still niche purposes for it, humans to do it, even in a fully automated economy. And then figure out how you can use the credential system to your advantage. Under no condition, engage in a public conversation about politics with teachers or with the activists left on your campus. I did a whole video about why this is futile. It's a ridiculous thing to do. If you want to create a political organization for yourself, organize it outside the affiliation of the university or try to bring it in under some pre-existing conservative umbrella like TPUSA, and then use those already filtered people to try to find the guys that are actually in to genuinely realist or dissident politics in your individual space. Try to go for quality over quantity when it comes to making friends and try to go for quality over quantity when it comes to developing skills, although by all means do try to develop a few core skills that you can take to the bank. It would be very good for you in the long term, in my opinion. And then also, I mean, look, projects are better than grades. Nobody cares about grades, really. I mean, don't fail your classes for sure, but like, don't kill yourself over getting A's. Like, I got straight A's in college. It did absolutely nothing for me. I don't think I got into a single grad program that I wouldn't have if my grades had been a little bit lower. And I spent way too much time like grinding uselessly. Don't be a striver. Don't be a striver. Avoid strive culture. Don't be like the Harvard is filling itself up with Asian applicants at this stage. I think that I don't think you should denigrate Asians for being strivers, but the Asian striver culture is a ticket to nowhere. It is absolutely something that people aren't going to care about in the long term. It's not fun. No good ideas are generated from it, and all it is a ticket is to a job that you hate, pulling down a salary that's going to inflate faster than you actually generate it. And you want to be somebody who has a large Rolodex, who has a lot of projects under their belt, who has a lot of passion for what they do, and who's got a few hobbies that have given them good friends, and who has the wisdom to do their political organizing not in the den of their enemies. Charlie Kirk is really the last time anyone should seriously debate on college campuses. The idea is ridiculous in the present moment. I think that you should invite college students to debate you, but always make sure that you control the venue and the people who are sponsoring it. The idea that you're going to have a conversation with your classmates or your professors is absolutely ridiculous. Lee Gronard for $5 USA. Have you seen The Night of the Seven Kingdoms? Cautiously optimistic, but the source material is a lot more sympathetic to chivalric values than the core Game of Thrones. Okay, sure. Yeah, that's good. But here's the thing, right? Um, there's so many things I haven't. Okay, so to answer your question, I haven't seen The Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I've read 2 or 3 reviews of it. I've read enough to know what I'm getting. Now, presumably, Night of the Seven Kingdoms is a completed novel by Martin himself. So if he's completed it, it probably has a bittersweet ending. That being said, the showrunners are under no obligation to give you Martin's ending. Not that George Martin is going to give you a spiritually cathartic ending because he's an atheist nihilist. He will give you an ending that feels like something Shakespeare would write. If you trained an LLM on Shakespeare, it would probably write a George R. R. Martin ending. And that's the ending that I would expect is canonical for The Night of Seven Kingdoms. The showrunners will do everything in their power to give you the most paused version of the ending imaginable. They do not want to give you a happy ending. They do not want to give you a bittersweet ending that, gestures in the direction of the values that are more classical and are more natural to human beings, or that young white men like. They don't want to do that, and they'll do everything in their power to stop that. And the fact that it's successful means that tacking on additional seasons while changing the ending is the natural thing the studio will want to do. So all these people are like, I'm getting cautiously optimistic about The Night of Seven Kingdoms. I got epically screwed over by Game of Thrones, yet this time it won't work. It's like watching Charlie Brown run towards Lucy holding the football in place. They're going to rug pull you on this. They're going to rug pull you. So I don't know. Fine. I'm sure it's great. I'm sure that it does all the right callbacks to classic fantasy and tales of medieval chivalry. But I would not expect a happy ending. To quote the TV show from when it was still good, if you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. That's a little bit depressing. I find it kind of I can't do The Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I can't ante up for another HBO George Martin spinoff after all the time I wasted on Game of Thrones. And furthermore, it's just depressing, isn't it? After all of this conversation about right-wing art, about how audiences just don't want what we produce at the Daily Wire. After all that happens, Angel Studios and the guys at the Daily Wire, they sit on their hands while the next based fantasy is taken over by their enemies, while Greta Gerwig directs the new Narnia movie. All of the properties that have naturally right-wing messages aren't actually being produced by right-wing art companies. They're eating your lunch. They're doing nothing about it. And as a consumer, how much of an insult would it be to get really into Night of the Seven Kingdoms when there are tons of fantasy and sci-fi authors in our circle that are writing stuff that is as good as Martin's or probably a little bit better? Admittedly, the guys in our circle are a little bit younger. They're more green than Martin. They don't have as a developed command over the English language and of storytelling. But good Lord, at least they believe in it. At least it's not some kind of cynical ploy for, the post woke media market. I don't know. The meta act of watching Night of the Seven Kingdoms is more depressing than any possible cathartic ending it could deliver to me at the end. Someone says favorite shoegaze band, My Bloody Valentine. That was was that too typical? Was that too normie? Could a movie blah 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 blah? Is it true you didn't rate The Northman as good movie? It's Hamlet, the greatest story plot. Yeah, I did not like The Northman. I thought it was gross and cynical. I thought it was a nihilistic movie, and I didn't think the nihilism had a point either. I think that nihilism like that has to say something, otherwise it's just gross spectacle. So I didn't like The Northman at all. Will the global economy enter a solvency crisis? I have no idea. I have no idea. It's just, we have no idea when these systems are going to collapse. I know that they're long-term insolvent. Is there a medium for blah, blah, blah? Yeah, I don't know if that's a well-formed question. Let me go back to the actual super chats and I'll swing back in on the at replies if anyone wants to answer. But guys, make your at reply questions quick. There's too many of them, and they're also not paid, so I can't spend more time answering them than the super chats. But thank you for that. That was a nice juicy question, Lee Grognard. So thank you for asking it. I did want to get into if someone asked me about comics in the chat, I did want to get into the Valerian and Laureline comic series. I've always been a huge fan of French comic books, from the Incal to David B to any number of those things, even to stupid stuff like Asterix and Tintin. I just always loved French graphic novels. I thought they're the real masters of graphic novels, not the Japanese, if you ask me. But there you go. Alex Forever for $5. The right can backdoor its way to the normies via economic policy. Well, can it? Look, here's a great example, like real estate prices. Everyone knows that the core problem for right wingers is the fact that real estate is too expensive. So what's the right wing economic policy for high real estate prices? The obvious solution is to crash the real estate market, but that will destroy the boomers' fortune and alienate the normies because it will make their short-term existence more painful. So, like, what's the selling point on the economic thing, right? Like, we're gonna crash the real estate market. We're gonna crash the economy, but like gently. Like, we're gonna gently crash the real estate economy, and in the long term, it will be good. That is what we should be doing, but it's not a message that's going to go over well with the normies. And I said that also, I'm a little bit sad myself. I was waiting for 3 or 4 years for the real estate market to bottom out. And I finally bought in because I was tired of having my family live out of a basement. And so if the real estate market got crashed now, I would be maximally screwed by that. But at least it would be the responsible thing to do. Because you can't have entire generations locked out of home ownership. It's impossible. Alex Forever for $5 says maybe the right will wake up when the men in particular wake up and stop the distractions of comfort seeking. Fried dopamine respecters and being accustomed to pleasure will destroy the movement. Well, the problem, obviously, Alex, is that our movement is an online movement and it's a movement born on social media. And social media runs on fried dopamine receptors. That being said, when it comes to organizing, the best organizers are always the people who are slow and steady and get the job done. There was, I wrote this article about the LinkedIn right, about all these people. Like 2 years ago, there were all these sort of new atheist libertarian types. They didn't all have the same ideas. It was like Richard Hanania, and it was Nathan Kaufness, and I'll throw Walt Bismarck in there too. But these guys were like, we're all about competition and being fast and being agentic and seizing the spotlight. And they're all about building things. But the problem is, and what a lot of these, the problem a lot of these guys encountered, there's sort of two paths that you can take as sort of like, a social media right winger. You can kind of be a turtle like me, slow and steady wins the race, and try to build in the real world. But if you go fast and break things, you end up with a lot of fans that are kind of autistic and can't really get anything done in the real world. And most of your time goes into managing them. Or alternatively, you have to constantly be on the verge of breaking out. Like, how long has it been? It's been 4 years of watching Richard Hanania's career, and he's almost just about to break through and be the next thing. Or you're like Nathan Kaufness, and you're just about to be the new thing, and then you go to be like someone who spends all this time complaining about Chris Rufo and other people who, for all Chris Rufo's other flaws, actually gets things done in the real world. But thank you very much, Alex Forever. Another super chat from you for $5. Thanks for the discussion. All the best during Lent. Well, thank you very much again. Lee Grognard for $3. For sure, both Martin and the showrunners are going to shit on it. At least we know the ending is the tragedy of Summer Hall where everyone burns. Well, yeah, but you haven't gotten to the denouement where like the girl boss actually set the fire and she's going to be, she's all based and she's going to be like the new thing. I don't know. They could ruin it. You can make anything fake and gay, even a Shakespearean tragedy. And so, the fact that something is based in its canonical form is no guarantee that a media property will be executed that way. That is one thing that the last 10 years of media consumption have demonstrated to us. For French comics, check out the Blueberry series. It's Western done by Mobius. Well, everyone knows Mobius. I will check that out. I don't know if I know that one specifically. But let me check the @ replies really quickly. I think that's the end of my super chats. No one actually @ replied me. Oh, did you like the magnetic fields? I love the magnetic fields. I love 69 Love Songs. That is one of all of the albums that came out that I think are kind of eternal albums in the 2000s. The 2000s had a lot of kind of good music, like the early 2000s. The indie wave of the early 2000s had a lot of really good songs and music. But I hate to say it, one of the only albums that I felt was kind of an eternal album for the ages, there was, I think it probably would have been the Magnetic Field 69 Love Songs. Which is just it's a very long album, 69 songs long, of just this diverse set of little ditties that are almost all earworms, sung by 3 different artists. And they've been covered up and down, used for commercials, but what a great little band. Blah 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 blah. The Northman has a lot of depth. The bloodline of his family. I know the arguments for the Northman, but the problem is that there's a lot of things that the Northmen could have been if the people directing it had gone all in on that message, but they didn't. They didn't go all in on the love story. They didn't go all in on the dedication to bloodlines. And so it's just like a heap of contradictions. It's just like there's no consistent narrative. I don't know what is the value being pursued. They don't do enough time showing me what the value is. If they want me to value the pagan bloodline, then the movie has to actually show me what the parameters are, because it's hard to see a person slaughter his entire family, including his innocent side of his family, and then say the point of all of this is the bloodline. To a modern person, that makes absolutely no sense. And the movie did no amount of work to actually educate me that there was some kind of coherent vision of beauty behind this all. I feel like a lot of pagans, they want to meme the Northman into being better than it actually was. And I see that, like, I see no evidence of it being better than it actually was. Oh, hey, we've got one more genuine super chat or entropy chat. Nerve AV Maker, thank you very much. I can actually get this one going to almost my usual length. Disagree on romanticism being poison. Romanticism is what's missing in the modern art era. Everything is materialized or psychologized. No embrace of the unfathomable unknowns of the universe. No wonder at the simple things like a fire in the hearth at a winter's night. Great art needs romanticism. Ah ha 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 ha. Yes, Nerve and V Maker, you are correct. Everything you said there is absolutely correct. Great art needs romanticism like food needs salt. But or like your baking recipe needs sugar. But romanticism in anime is like the kid that takes the entire thing of sugar and pours it in to your recipe so that all you taste is sugar, or that takes salt and pours it all over your food so all you can eat is salt. Some, like I said before, Goethe employs elements of romanticism. Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters employ elements of romanticism. Carlyle even employs elements of romanticism. These are all contemporaries from the early 19th century, so I am kind of repeating myself. But one of my favorite poets, William Blake, Songs of Innocence and Experience, all of those great wood cuttings, Tiger, Tiger in the Night, oftentimes described as a romantic poet. But you've got to mix romanticism with something else. You've got to, and it's got to be something that cuts the edge off it a little bit. You know, Ayn Rand famously said that she mixed romanticism with realism, which is essentially what Jane Austen did. Jane Austen took elements of the romantic style and mixed it with a more realistic style, and that's what gives her novels what her audience likes, which is that they are both realistic studies of the human person, but also at the same time sort of idealistic romantic projections of great heroism of what people could be. But you know, the way that Ayn Rand mixes realism and romanticism together is like, it's like the reverse of Jane Austen. It's like the worst elements of both brand. It has the unbelievability of romanticism, yet kind of like the cynical pathology of realism. And I actually kind of appreciate Ayn Rand for what she is, which is kind of like pulp Soviet realism with a capitalist spin on it. And her novels are fun to read. Like they are actually kind of fun to read. They're like kind of the barbarian novels in that sense. But they are you know, the recipe is all wrong, right? It should have been like 3 parts flour, 1 part sugar, 3 parts realism, 1 dash of romanticism. With Ayn Rand, it's like three parts sugar and 1 part flour, and it's like this horrible super saturated concoction that nobody can eat except, like, you know, as a joke. And you know, so I mean, romanticism is a good flavor. Just in anime, it's overpowering. I'm trying to think of some good examples of this. I don't know. You know, take anything. I'm trying to think of what's an anime that everyone knows that is not like. Because I would say that Cowboy Bebop is actually good. I always said The Last Exile because that's the one that I remember having this revelation about. And you know, the Last Exile is this highly stylized, romantic, Victorian style anime, steampunk anime. And I remember watching it and thinking, well, this is exactly the kind of world that I wish I was entering into. But when I watch Last Exile, so when I read Dostoevsky or Jane Austen, I feel like what really sits with me is kind of the small elements of heroism, like the positive romantic elements that sit with me. How can I kind of be the Elizabeth Bennet? Well, I'd be like Mr. Darcy. That sounds weird because he's kind of like a, I don't know. How do I be the virtuous character, the Alosha in my own life? How can I be the prince? How can I be from the idiot or something like that? Right? How can I be the great characters, the Alexis, the Pierres from Tolstoy? And there is romanticism in Tolstoy as well. How can I incorporate that into my life? And and uh, and the details, like the big gowns and the Victorian stylings in genuine literature, seem to be almost secondary to the human spirit on display. Whereas when watching something like The Last Exile, uh, all of the characters' behaviors seem kind of impossible, and the only thing that kind of, it just left me wanting kind of a highly stylized aesthetic. It made me want these kind of like experiences that were impossibly picturesque and that were kind of impossibly, stylized, and kind of looking at reality and kind of hating reality because it didn't match that level of aspiration. And for me, good art should allow you to look at people and kind of see the subtle beauties in life that lay behind it all. And my big problem with anime is it's too much romanticism. It's got to be a secondary flavor in a medley. And you are right that modern cynical entertainment is missing that flavor in the medley, but it's got to be used subtly, because if it's not used subtly, you're going to burn your audience's taste out, and they're only going to be able to want cynical work from there on. They're not going to, your mind's going to reject the simulation, right? You're going to develop it's like if someone fed you, if someone fed you what's a highly for I had this really rich French dinner when I went to France as a young kid, and it was way too rich for me, and I got sick of it. And for the rest of my life, I could never eat any of that kind of like pureed meat substance that's in a lot of French dishes. I don't know if it was foie gras or pate or something, but it was something like that. And it was because it was so unsubtle to me that now I'm allergic to it. So if you put too much romanticism in your stories, you make people allergic to it. And that's the real problem with anime right now. It's not that I don't lament the flavor not being there. It's that it's overused. And our two options are either to ignore it entirely or to overuse it. Gabriel Mundi for $100. Wow, definitely getting the compensation out here. Thank you so much for the generous contribution, Gabriel. I really appreciate it. But I think that might be the last of the super chats. Um, uh, yeah. Anyway, I will retire there. I think with a psalm. Maybe we can do a psalm for Lent. Let's do Psalm 32. That's one of the popular ones, right? They say for Lent. KGV. KGV is the best. I don't care if I'm a Catholic. KGV is the best. I know, like, actually, you should read the New Catholic. What is this? Come on, man. You're not giving me the psalm. And okay, here we go. So let's check the entropy one more time. Okay, cool. Thank you guys all for joining me. Here is Psalm 32. Blessed is he who transgresses and is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man unto whom the Lord imputeth no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no guile. When I keep my silence, my bones waxed old through my roaring all the long days. For day and night thy hand was heavy upon me. My moisture is turned into the drought of summer. Selah. I acknowledge my sin unto thee, and mine iniquity I do not hide. I say, I will confess my transgressions unto the Lord, and thou forgivest the iniquity of my sin. For this every one that is godly pray unto three in a time when thou mayest be found. Surely in the floods of great waters they shall not come nigh unto him. Thou art my hiding place, thou shalt preserve me from trouble, thou shalt compass me about with songs of deliverance. I will instruct thee to teach in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. Be not of the horse, or as a mule which is not understanding, whose mouth must be held in with a bit and bridle, lest they come near unto thee. Many sorrows shall be the wicked, but he that trusteth in the Lord, mercy shall compass about him. Be glad in the Lord, and rejoice, ye righteous, and shout for joy, all ye that are upright in heart. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me for this last live stream, this last podcast of Ordinary Time, podcast 71, Shroves and Stylings. I hope you guys have a very wonderful rest of the evening and a very holy Lenten